So okay, in this part I would like to get my UVs projected and then apply my materials. So first of all, what I'd like to do is make sure that I get my static geometry out of it. So I need to get like a snapshot, if you will, from the start frame and a snapshot from the frame where they're all kind of turned over. So I'm going to add a render output, so a ROP output driver. And in the path, I'm just going to point it to a new directory. I'll just call this geo, and let's call this one wave top. In this case, I don't need the $F, because if I do, then it's going to use the frames and it's going to try to update this geometry, and I don't want that. I just want one static piece of geometry. So I'll name it like that and say accept. Yeah. And then I'll copy this parameter. I'm going to create a file, sop, like this, and paste copied relative reference. So now these two are linked to one another. Now obviously this gives them an error because, you know, this hasn't been written to disk yet. So if I just say render, yeah, now it's rendered it out. So if I just rewind this, there you go. So it's updated, it's cooked, and it's working. So I'll just rename this ROP geometry to top, and file as well, so I know this is the top. And I'm gonna copy both. And now I want this one, instead of to be top, I want this one to be bottom. So I'm going to change this to bottom. And this one can be instead, let's call this one as well bottom. So I just copy this parameter and paste it in there to update it. So paste relative reference. And there we go, and update it. Now obviously this one doesn't exist yet, and what I want is all of these basically when they have been turned over, so I can do my projections, so there's no problems. So I can either project it like this as it is and render it out, but if you don't have the option to do that, because I don't know, your grid is extremely heavy, your resolution is heavy, then you can just jump inside of your pop network, go down all the way to your rotation, and over there in my highest position, in my angle, I'm going to add a little offset. Now at the beginning it's always 0, so I'm going to add a little offset of 180 degrees, like this. If I go back out of it, then Houdini just cooks all the way down, and all the way down, and it's, now you see the red face, so they're being flipped 180 degrees. And I'm going to render out this geometry, so let's render that. Okay. And again, let's have a look at this guy. Now this one is working. Okay, so that's good. I'm just gonna get rid of that offset again, so I have to jump back into pops, get rid of that offset, so just up, and it's gone. It's back to normal. Should be. There we go. It's back to normal. Okay, so this is static, and this is static, but reversed. So what I'm going to do now is on this guy add a UV project. So UV project. Right, and it's going to try and find the best plane by itself and do a projection, but just to make sure, I want to project in the ZX plane, ZX, and say initialize. If you do that, you can see the UVs by pressing space 5 over the viewport, so space 5. You can see the UVs over there into the UV view. Okay. Back into space 1, back to perspective, space 1. And I want to do the same thing for this guy, so again add a UV project over there to ZX plane, and initialize. So now they both have been initialized. One more thing to keep in mind though is all of this geometry comes with groups, right? It has top groups and bottom groups and side groups. So what I really want to do is I want to UV project, but in this case I want to use only the primitives in the top group, because I only want to change their values. So for the group I'm going to change this to group top. It's going to give a warning, and it's going to say, okay, it's not a valid group, but you can change this group type from points to vertices, and then it'll just work fine. You can do the same thing over there, so the bottom group. So the other side is the group bottom, so I'll just rename that little file note quickly. Bottom. and change this to vertices as well. Okay, now what I want to do is start to transfer these to one another. So just like I could lay down a point SOP, I can lay down a vertex SOP. Why a vertex SOP? Well, because if I created this attribute, I said it's going to be an attribute on vertices. So if I middle mouse button on this, I say one vertex attribute UV. If I had left this to points, as such, points, then it's going to say one point attribute UV. So you can either apply it to the points or to the UVs or to the vertices. So I'm generally using vertices when it comes to UV manipulation. Okay, so in the first input I'm going to put the top, in the second input I'm going to put the bottom, right? And then over there in keep texture I'm going to change that to add texture. So what I want to do is to some faces I want to apply these coordinates. So the top faces are being projected and being used there, so I want to definitely keep the top faces. So I'm going to use the bottom faces from the other guy. So I'm going to say, okay, apply whatever is coming in from the second input, apply that to the bottom faces. So this is coming from the second input, so I add a little 2 to the end, press tab, another little 2, tab, another 2. And there we go. Now they've just been transferred. So this information that has been calculated there for the bottom faces has been transferred onto this information, but only for the bottom group, so the information that was projected onto the top is maintained. Okay, now what I want to do is, this is my moving geometry. This doesn't move, because basically it's baked out the disk over there, only the first frames. So what I want to do there, right, is this moving geometry. I want to transfer the vertex information, the UV information from there onto the moving information. So I'm gonna make another. I'm gonna copy this quickly, and I'm going to change the input. So say, actually, let's change it like this, so that the information from the second input is being applied to the first input. So I don't need to type this, I did it already for there. So basically what happens now is, where originally this one only had a one primitive attribute, the color, diffuse color, there is no there's no UV information, and now if I look there is now another attribute, vertex, which has UV information on it. Okay, so now with these attributes laid out, I want to start applying materials to them. So what I'm going to do is just add a material to this. So material, start typing material. Which material? Well, we haven't got one yet, so I'm going to quickly create one in shaders. So lay down a shop network, and jump inside. The kind of type of material that I'm going to be using is a Vex layered. So a Vex layered surface. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to name it Vex layered top. So first of all, this is going to be for the top material. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and there in my texture map I want to choose a texture. So if I go to my HIP file, this is my HIP file, or rather the HIP directory, there's a folder. I've got textures. I've got 2 textures in there, one for the top and one for the bottom. You can use anything you like. So I'm going to choose this one. A few more things before I leave this area is that I also want to say I don't really want to have any specular on these guys, because it's going to really become really bright. So I'm going to turn down the specular. I mean, this is a bit tweaking, so you don't need to do this. I'm going to change my lighting model as well, from being a fung to being a constant. So this will change the way the lights look at render time. Okay, so this is all good. So I'm going to copy this material, paste it, and change this to bottom. So this material will now be bottom. So bottom. And I need to change my texture map. So in my texture map, just turn that off and grab my second texture. Okay, so now I've got a top and a bottom material. I'm gonna go back up. So in my first material, I've added my first material, so I'm going to say, okay, which one? I want to have my top material. So there we go, my top material. And I want to apply this top material to my top group. So group top. So now it's only being applied to my top group. Now there's a little problem going on as well, which means that at the moment the colors that are coming in from my geometry are multiplying. So what I'm going to do is just add a color in between, yeah? And I'm going to make it a primitive color, because the previous color as well over there is a primitive attribute. Over there is a primitive attribute, so make sure that diffuse color is white as well. So now everything is white, and this will be the first texture that is going to be applied, and then I'm going to apply another material for the second group. So basically this will be for the bottom, yeah, so choose the correct bottom group, choose the correct bottom material, accept this, and basically that's pretty much it. So now both of the groups, yeah, are being assigned. So what I'm going to add one more thing is a null, yeah, so add a null to this and say out, yeah. So now I know that this is the final one, so the one that will be rendered. One handy little trick to make sure that this one is actually the one that renders, yeah, is by pressing Control left mouse button click on this little node, and this will put the display flag on out. Sorry, the render flag on the out node, so it is always at that level. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a quick test render, and go to out, so my ROPs, and I'm gonna lay down a new mantra. Okay, and over there you can say, okay, your frames, how much frames do you want to render? So I mean, you know, you can kind of choose a nice frame to do a little test. So something like this looks quite nice. In my case, what I'm just going to do is change this. Well, I suppose I'll change it to 3. I'm a quad-core machine here, and I'm just going to turn off my use max processor, so it doesn't use all my processors that way. It's just because it gives a bit of an error. Okay, and now I'm going to do a test render with my mantra. So this is the number of processors, by the way. Mentioned this in one of the other tutorials. Okay, so the resultant geometry over there, you can kind of see it. It's a bit dark, it's a bit black. So what I'm going to do is add some lights to this. So let's say let's add some light. So a light over there. So I'm gonna bring up my shelf back and just say a spotlight. Let's name this guy key, and let's add another light opposite-ish of it, and let's do another spotlight, and I'm going to name this guy rim. So this is going to give a bit of an edge, and I'm going to reduce its settings to something like 0.3, so a lot less bright. This one is probably a bit too bright as well, so something like 0.9. And one more light from the side, so I've got one there and I've got one there, so something like from there, and another light, spotlight, and this guy can be also a bit, 0.4 will do. Okay, and let's call this one fill. So I've got my different lights. I want my key light to cast shadows, so I'm just gonna select my key light, go to shadows and say ray traced. That'll do fine. Now it has nothing to cast shadows on, so I just kind of wanna grab my grid and just put it underneath it. So I'll just put a new geometry object down, go inside there, delete my file, and I'm going to do an object merge. So I'm now going to grab actually the initial grid that I had from my first object. So let's have a look. Where's my grid? Should be somewhere. There's my grid. So this grid, accept this. So now it's over there. And what I can do now is just offset this slightly. So maybe a transform, just to scale it up a little bit, like 1.2, something like that. Okay, and go back up. One thing that you do notice is the little cubes are intersecting, so you kind of want to lift them up the ground a little bit. So let's just do it over there in the on the object level. So something like, I don't know, 0.2, 0.3, 0.25, something like this. I mean, I know they're you can link this in with however much height they've got, so you can make this automatic. Okay, so there's my key light, there's my rim light, there's my fill light, so classic 3-point light setup. And I am going to put in a camera, so something like this. So control click on your camera icon, and now we've got a camera. Maybe zoom it out just slightly so it's kind of got everything. Okay, and let's do another render. So Mantra 1, let's have a look at this. Okay. Alright, that's a bit weird. It's a little bit black over there, so let's have a look what's going on. Probably something to do with the way that the UVs are projected. Let's have a look. I'm going to rewind this and do a little test render, because this is probably forgot something with the groups or the UVs that are being messed up a bit. Yeah, this one's completely black, so that's not quite what I wanted. So let's have a look. It's probably in there, group top, group bottom. This looks alright. Let's have a look. Group top. The information is being transferred. It's probably being overwritten because I might not have... No, this is correct. The group top and the group bottom is in there. Okay, I found a little problem. Basically, the little problem was that whilst I was copying this vertex onto this vertex, I left in the group bottom, and obviously I do not want that. I want this to be applied to all. So basically, that's why the bottom textures were showing up, but not the top textures. So yeah, definitely important to which group it's applied, so this should solve the problem. And then we've got our so it's actually working. So this is like the textures are being applied, but they're upside down. So the only thing that I'll be putting in is a UV transform to kind of flip these textures over. So I'll just say, okay, a UV transform in there, UV transform, and I want to scale them. In this case, it's going to be in Y, yeah, because we're looking. Oops, we're looking. Come on. I'll just get rid of this. Right. Sorry about that. So basically, I want to scale them in Y. Yeah, this is in a UV space, so this is the Y axis. I want to, scale them around this axis. You don't think about it as in I want to scale them in this Y axis, because it's not this axis that you're using. You're not using this viewport. You're using the UV view. So really, what you're doing when you're starting to scale this, I'm just gonna reset this to defaults. When you're starting to scale this value, yeah, you see it's kind of scaling it down. Yeah. So I'm going to say -1. Now since it's tiling, yeah, you can just move this up like, oops, wrong one. You can move this up like this and it's back into its normal position. And I'm going to apply this for the bottom textures as well. And let's have a look now. Through our camera. Play this. I have to set my display flag. Play this. Okay. And let's have a look. Something like this. And there we go. Yep. So you can kind of start to see the shadows are working, the materials are there. Also if I just say all the way in the beginning and I render this, the materials are now, so the texture are now correctly applied. So I mean, yeah, it's just, there's the figure, and if it's completely rotated, so if it's completely at the back, it'll just be completely flipped over. So with this, we've pretty much come to the end of this tutorial session. One of the things that is possible and that I kind of left out, but that is possible with this example and the same approach really, is you could use broken up pieces of geometry. Yeah, go and find their middle point. So this is the backside. Go and find the middle point of these pieces, so of these rough pieces of geometry, and use the same particle approach, where you know, the points are being selected by a torus or any other kind of grouping method, and run through the pop network and copy the chunks of geometry back onto the particles. It's not too difficult to do that, and then you can do the same thing. The only thing that you will have to notice then is that those chunks of geometry are not necessarily symmetrical, so you might have to do a little bit of trickery with the normals, like flipping the textures based upon if the normal is facing the camera or not. Or you could use the value, like the value that drives our linear interpolation value. So if you know that it's 180 degrees and you know that, like, say halfway through it's 90 degrees, so which means it's kind of not facing the camera, then you could use that as well. I mean, so to assign certain faces to a certain group, you could approach it that way, instead of having to do, you know, normal calculations. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this session, and yeah, I hope you learned a lot. So see you next time.